Recently, I made this render, and I want to show you how I made the glowing thing in the middle. I'm going to split this into 4 parts: the main material, the main mesh, the outside volumetrics, and then lastly, animation. To start off, make a sphere and then add a material to it. Now the material can be split into 2 parts: the principal BSDF and the volumetrics. To start off with the BSDF, make a base color of purple, turn the roughness down to 0, turn the alpha down to around 0.1, turn the transmission up to about 0.9, and add in a bit of coat. And then that's basically it for the surface. Now you can mess around with the alpha, the transmission, and the coat to make a different surface material. But now we're going on to the volumetrics. This is the most important part and can be split into 5 different volumetric shaders. The first one is a gradient with a noise overlay. To make this, make a gradient node and press Ctrl T with Node Wrangler enabled. Then change the mapping from point to vector, and the texture coordinate from generated to object. Then for the gradient texture, change it to spherical, and add in a color ramp and a math node. Change the color ramp so it's more tight, and then plug that into a math node to change it to multiply, and then multiply by around 10. Now make a noise node and add in the texture coordinate and mapping node to it. Then make a mixed color node and plug in the noise texture into B, and plug in the gradient color ramp into the factor, and change the multiply node to after the mix shader. Then create a principled volume node, turn the density down to 0, turn the emission color to purple, and plug in the value from the math node into emission strength. Now if you play around with the 2 color ramps, you can change the gradient strength and the noise strength. Now you want to make some white clouds in the volumetric. So to do this, make a noise texture, make a color ramp, and a math node again. Then also make a principled volume, set the density to 0, set the emission color to gray, and then plug in the noise to the color ramp, make the color ramp more tight, then plug in the color ramp to the math node, change it to multiply it by an arbitrary value, and then plug in that into the emission strength. Now we want to add another gradient for a greenish bluish material. So just make a gradient node, do the exact same thing with the purple, but don't add in a noise mask over it. Then just plug that into a principled volume, set the density to 0, change the volume color to blue, then plug in all of the values from the gradient, color ramp, math node, etc. into the emission strength. Now we want to make a red and blue volumetric noise. To do this, make a noise node, change it from 3D to 4D, increase the scale and detail, then plug that into a color ramp, make it closer together, then plug that into a math node, change it to multiply it by about 10, then plug that into a principled volumes, emission strength input, change the emission color to red, and set the density to 0. Then just copy this and duplicate it, but change it from red to blue, and on the noise axis 4D, which is the W, change it to a higher number. What this does is offsets the red and the blue to make it look less uniform. And that's basically it for the material. Now we want to move on to the main mesh. The first thing you want to do is duplicate the sphere, scale it down, and then delete the material on the second sphere and change it to an alpha of 0. Then add in a particle system and make a new sphere. Now in the new sphere's material, add in a particle info node and plug in random into a color ramp set to constant, with half of it being red and half of it being blue. Then plug that color into the color of the emission of the principal BSDF and increase the strength to around 15. Then on the sphere with the particle system, set the particle system to the sphere we just made with the cool color, and then set the lifespan to around 50, set the amount to about 200 if you're having a 100 frame animation like I had, and set it so that gravity doesn't affect it in field weights. Next, add in a force, put that into the center of the emitter object, and then set the strength to -20. Now when you play the animation, you should see that the particles go straight to the center, but we want the particles to go slightly out and then back into the center. So to do this, go to the particle system, change the velocity and increase it to something like 3. Next to the main mesh, add in a subdivision surface modifier, set it to 2, and add in a displace modifier. Then make a new texture, set it to clouds, and increase its size. Now that that entire section of the main mesh is done, let's move on to the volumetrics and surroundings. To start off, duplicate the sphere and increase it in scale. This just adds some more purple mist around the entire scene. Then add in a cube, make a new volume scatter node, and set it to something like 0.1, and set the anisotropy to around 0.8. And that's all I did for the volumetrics. Now it's on to the final section of animation. If you want to animate the material, it's very simple to do. Just change all of the noise textures from 3D to 4D and animate the W. So for example, go to frame 1, set it to 0, and then increase the frame to, for example, 100 and increase the W to something like 5. You can also rotate them using the mapping node that is automatically done with Node Wrangler. Next, we can also add in an animation of the displacement map by increasing its scale throughout the animation. And finally, we can also animate the sphere by making it slowly go up and down and rotating just by using normal keyframes. And a little bit of extra is that you can slowly move the camera inwards and also use camera shakeify, set it to investigation, and set it to something like 0.3 or 0.2. You can then, in the graph editor, edit some final things, for example if it's linear or not. And then after a couple minutes of work, this is the result you should get. Thanks for watching this video. If you want more help with animation, check out my video on the graph editor. I'll see you in the next one.